Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Vegas Legal Magazine podcast. I'm Mark Fierro of Fierro Communications with Vegas Legal Magazine publisher Tyler Morgan. Thank you so much for joining us today. Today, our guests are two prominent attorneys in the legal profession here. They also are both managing board members of the Nevada chapter, the American Association of Jewish Lawyers and Jurists. Attorneys David Chesnoff, Patty Glaser, here to talk about the direction of the AAJLJ in Nevada, both present and future. David, Patty, thank you so much for joining us today. We were saying just...
Mark, I was promised an opportunity to also plug my all-time favorite institution, Hebrew University of Jerusalem, if you'll let me.
Absolutely, absolutely. I'm sure we'll have a chance to get to that. You know, we were just saying, I feel as if I missed the startup innings of the game, but we're talking about anti-Semitism, and it just seemed to have exploded, and anti-Israel in particular, almost out of thin air. Who wants to go? David, let me hear your position. Where do you think this came from? And am I mistaken? Was it sudden?
No, but it's always there under the surface. And historically, whenever there are problems in the world, unfortunately, people have always pointed the finger at Jewish people as somehow having this incredible power and conspiracy to control the world. Amazingly, there's only 14 million Jews in the whole world compared to the billions of other people. So it shows you how absurd the concept is. But the thing with Israel is more a result, I think, of shifting political thinking. And there's been a confusion that somehow Israel is associated with oppression, when in reality, Israel is the result of a birthright that exists for thousands of years and which became reality as a result of the Holocaust, where 6 million people were killed. And the idea would be there would be a homeland or a safe place for people so that when anti-Semitism did occur, at least everybody would be together. And of course, they built one of the greatest fighting forces in the world. But the problem is that every time this undercurrent of hatred develops, it spills over. In this country, you saw the shooting at the synagogue last year in Pittsburgh, and Israel feels the wrath of it. And then there's this concept that somehow they are the oppressor, when in reality, what everybody's forgotten is after World War II, when the United Nations established Israel, they also agreed to a Palestinian country. But the Palestinians weren't satisfied with their own country. They wanted the part that was Israel too, and they attacked the Jews then. It's just been a battle forever since when we were slaves in Egypt. And we don't ask for reparations.
Patty Glaser, quick question. It seems as if this new anti-Semitism, these anti-Israel feelings, it seems as if the place that they got a foothold in the strongest was in the universities here in the United States.
Well, I want to say, and I know you had a guest on before today who may disagree with me. I think one of those, the protests that you read about are overblown, because sometimes you scratch below the surface and you find out that these people who were part of these quote movements, there's maybe 3 people, but they scream a lot and yell a lot and command people's attention a lot, but they are much louder than they are influential. I want to be, I see that at UCLA, in Los Angeles. I've seen it in other universities as well. But I want to just, I very much agree with David about this history. Whenever there's somebody, you need to blame somebody, why not the Jews? But I think it's a very sophisticated problem. I think if you, last time I was in Paris, which obviously was before the pandemic, there are still a number of Jews there. Nobody was wearing a kippah. Nobody was wearing a star around their neck because they're literally physically afraid. I've gone to synagogues in Switzerland. You'll see barbed wire around them because they are afraid. And now you're seeing that kind of fortress mentality, even in this country. And it is the old story of we have to blame somebody. Let's blame the 3 Jews that are running the world, which is, obviously nonsense. And then you see celebrities taking cheap, uninformed, ridiculous shots. They don't know what they're talking about. They have no history. They forgot to read their history books, prejudiced or otherwise. They have no recollection of the horrors that have been thrust on Jews historically, not just the genocide, which was obviously awful, but historically. I mean, we've been expelled from countries that people don't get that. We've been expelled from England. We've been expelled from Spain. And there is a refuge, thank God for Harry Truman, in this little place, this little sliver of land in Israel. And we don't even demand that it only be for us. We share it with Israeli Arabs, make no mistake about it. All we're saying is we need a Jewish democratic state, which means also, and that's part of the complexity, you can't annex the entire West Bank. You just can't annex the whole West Bank, because if you annex the whole West Bank, what do you have? You have the Arab population will far exceed the Jewish population. So people need to be thoughtful about this. Anyway, I feel like I'm on my pedestal, but I feel pretty strongly that it's an ongoing problem. I grew up in West Virginia, which is very southern, even though geographically it's not very southern. And I played a little competitive tennis, so Patty, yeah, we don't like Jews too much, but you're different. You can come to the country club kind of thing. And you also had a tremendous number of Jews who were self-hating Jews, desperately wanted to assimilate. And when I came, I live primarily in Los Angeles. When you come to Los Angeles and Las Vegas, it is so nice to be in a situation where so many people that you rub elbows with professionally, and jurists, friends are Jews. That is a good feeling. And then when you take that feeling and you go to Israel, my mother she passed away. She was 75 years old the first time she went to Israel. And when she got to Israel, she called me and she said it's the first time she's ever been proud to be a Jew. Self-hating Jew. I adored my mother. Self-hating Jew. But that's what Israel has done for the Jewish people, and we can never forget that.
So what's really going on in the United States that's suppressing the Jewish population? Because a lot of this sounds very reminiscent of what's going on with the Muslim population right now. So can you give me some examples of kind of where we are in the United States? Because I know before in the previous podcast, we were talking about how even at UNLV, that there's some groups that are sort of coming together to try and, disparage the Jewish population. So can you just elaborate on some examples here?
David, do you want to go, or I'm glad to go, but go ahead.
No, I'll tell you, it's primarily based on ignorance, generalizations, the same kind of prejudice that you hear Black Lives Matter talking about. It's just blind hatred based on ignorance, and it's very prevalent. I never thought that I would see people marching in Virginia chanting, "Jews will not replace us," in crew neck shirts and khakis, and then have national political leaders say, well, some of them have a point. I mean, I was devastated to see it, and I was devastated that there wasn't a giant reaction. And what's really strange is there's no giant reaction to.
You're breaking up a little bit, but to your point, I thought that was the scariest part of it. The same way that the officer on Mr. Floyd's neck, the fact that these were young men that were well dressed, middle class, Jews will not replace. What the hell does that even mean? I really, really don't get the thread, and I feel like I missed the beginning of the movie or something.
I don't know that we're gonna.
I want to, but I want to stay with Tyler's concern or his question because I think it's important. I think that the political parties in this country have effectively realigned, and I'm now seeing organizations reacting to that. I happen to be a Republican, but Democrats who are saying we want to make sure that there is a pro-Israel position within the Democratic Party, and they had a lot to do with some of the parts of the Democratic platform that are going to be announced relatively soon. But it's very important that we call out, not in a nasty way, I don't need to call people names, but you need to say, I am not going to be silent when people are coming forward and articulating prejudices and articulating positions that are both anti-Israel, anti-Jewish, and not pushing back. The guy who sits behind you and mumbles to his friend, Kike, you need to turn around and say, excuse me, I'm Jewish. That's offensive to me. You can no longer, people can't be silent in any political party. And that's what I'm hoping we'll have a renaissance about. I don't know if we will, but I'm hoping.
You know, so much of the news in the 60s, 70s, 80s, early 90s, never a week, a month certainly never went by that there wasn't a story about a bus being blown up with children, with women who are simply going to work. And I don't know what's changed about that dynamic, but whenever you do hear anything about Israel now, it's more about the turmoil, and it's more about lands, and it's more about, it just seems to me as if Israel, this country with whom we're joined at the hip forever, our longest term friends, never mind in that part of the world, are just our longest term friends that have been at our side no matter what, that narrative has completely changed, and that they're somehow now seen as the oppressor.
Mark, I want to mention one thing. There's a wonderful documentary called The Gatekeepers, and in it, a number of Israelis, including heads of Mossad, I mean, essentially their CIA and their FBI, are interviewed. You would never see another country in this world, including the United States of America, that would allow a film like this to be made and distributed, which essentially people, these former heads of their CIA and their FBI are literally looking in the camera and saying they can't sleep at night knowing some of the things they have been required to do to protect Israel. And they are, I mean, what they say that are both, it's in some respects criticism, but also it just shows you the humanity of these people and what they have done to avoid. I mean, who drops flyers in Gaza? I mean, what kind of country drops flyers and says, we're about to bomb such and such, would you please move out of the way? Who does that other than
Mark,
in Israel?
in
Israel.
Mark, traditionally, everybody saw Israel as the underdog. And they were like Mighty Mouse, and they always fought and they beat everybody against in 100-to-1 odds, multiple armies, and everybody cheered for them. But over time, people become jealous. They misunderstand the purpose of the state of Israel. When you think of the technical and medical advances that are made by Israeli scientists and doctors, when you think of the number of times there have been disasters in the world where the Israelis send specialists, like, well, you talked about bombings. If there's an earthquake, they send their people who are used to digging people out of rubble. They've made so many contributions to the world. Now, one of the faults is they could use you, Mark. They have a terrible public relations person, whoever runs the Israeli government, because not enough is done to talk about what they do in the world, around the world. That's why these organizations that Patty and I are associated with are so important, because we're trying to spread the word. Patty will tell you about the Hebrew University and what it does. My brother went to the Hebrew University. He left the United States when he was 17 and went there. The lawyers organization and judges organization that we're involved in, which includes Nevada Supreme Court judges, district court judges, is a fantastic group that's going to start to educate people more to why Israel is so important. I mean, when you say they're an ally, they are the buffer between us and Iran in many respects, who, no matter if you're a Democrat or Republican, you understand that the existential threat that Iran poses. But again, Mark, it's just a shifting. And young people, you know, the more time that goes from the Holocaust, the more people who start to say it doesn't happen. I mean, I read an article in the New York Times the other day. The German military and the German police department has been infiltrated by ultra-right people that are secretly gathering. Now, it kind of goes to the question we were asked earlier. Their anger is towards the Muslim people in Germany now and immigrants. But myself, that's why any kind of reaction like that or prejudice towards another group of people based on who you are is repulsive. But young people are the ones who are going to have to start to recognize it and be educated about it.
Including young Jews. I mean, you know, the old adage about if they killed the African Americans, I didn't say anything. They killed the Serbians, I didn't say anything. I didn't say anything, and then they came for us. You have to protect the Muslims. You have to. We needed to do it in Bosnia. Absolutely had to. So I want to just tell you a couple of really quick vignettes. There was somebody I know well who's a doctor in Israel, ran a hospital, a temporary hospital on the Syrian border during the worst time in Syria, during the worst war in Syria. Did you ever read anything about it? No, because if you had read something about it, they would have had to shut down. And the number of children they saved is it's phenomenal. All Jews, no credit whatsoever, didn't want the credit, just wanted to help. Second, different story. We're in Israel during the Second Intifada, and we're coming down from Mount Scopus, which is where the original Hebrew University was built. And you hear gunshots. I mean, gunshots. And some lunatic had gone onto a bus of school children, girls, just mowed them down, just slaughtered them. And you drive back into the city, the main part of Jerusalem, and what's astounding is the resilience that they don't allow themselves to be overwhelmed with this. Nobody lives with a bunch of schoolgirls ever getting killed, but they have to go on because that's what they do. So the least that David and I can do is raise a few bucks to help Israel, because we don't have to be there every day under that kind of pressure and that kind of lack of security. So I'm done.
You know, it's timely. David just mentioned that Israel does a poor job. Mr. John Lewis, who just passed, it's notable that if you look in those films, you know, of him being struck over the head, of him marching with fear of his life, that there are a few white faces in that crowd, and they're all Jews.
Yeah.
They're all young Jewish men and women. It's hit me too.
Absolutely.
And I think that's where part of the learning process starts, is because you hear some of this from the inner city, from African Americans that talk about Jews in a disparaging manner. And I'm not sure that anybody that ever saw those pictures and realized who those people were who got murdered along with the other, you know, the first people who took buses down there, the Freedom Riders, the people who disappeared and were murdered were Jews. Those young white people were Jews. I think there is a part of the historical, part of the narrative that is completely missing from a lot of young people's understanding of the world today.
I agree with you, Mark, and I don't intend to be the devil's advocate, but there are some neighborhoods in New York, Los Angeles, I don't know about Las Vegas as well, who when when the Jews were the original neighborhood people, and then it became more people of color moved in, and those people of color feel like they were discriminated against by shop owners and employers who happen to be Jewish. And I think part of the stereotype comes from that, but that is such a stereotype and not who we are. I mean, we really, you know, and I half jokingly say to people, we're the chosen people, not because we're better, because we have more responsibility at every level, we have more responsibility. Anyway.
Mark, my mom marched in the 60s, along with all my aunts. I mean, and I've always been very active. I was a member of the NAACP early on in my career here in Las Vegas, when we had a lot of problems with the police and the African American community in the 80s. But it's a matter of young people really not understanding the history, and the success of a lot of the Jewish community kind of backfires because the pain that the Jewish people have felt kind of gets forgotten because of success, and as though it didn't take a lot to get there. But it's really a matter of teaching people and reminding people of what the Jewish people have been through. And when the story is told, I mean, when these Holocaust survivors go to these schools and teach kids about the Holocaust, I've seen video where the kids' mouths are wide open. They can't even believe the stories that they're hearing. They can't comprehend it, the horror. But it gets through, and there has to be more of that, and that's what we try to do.
You know, Mark, I don't know if you've ever had the opportunity, if anybody has had the opportunity to go to Auschwitz, but if you haven't, I urge you to go, not because it's not for all the right reasons. When you go through there, it is overwhelming. If David and I were richer, we could send a plane load of kids every month, because that's how much of an education it is. It is beyond anything you can imagine. And I really, really recommend it. I don't know if you've been, David, but it is just, you know, Auschwitz I, that's where they killed political prisoners, but they figured out the Germans are good. They figured out they couldn't kill enough people. You can't kill that many people by shooting them or hanging them. So Auschwitz II, which is Birkenau, is where the death camps, the gas chambers. And the precision is overwhelming, and it is something you can't speak. It's not like, you know, when you go to a movie and you want to, you'd like to go with a friend or an art gallery because you want to share that experience. You can't share this. It's that overwhelming.
Eisenhower ordered cameras to the death camps because he said no one will ever believe this, and then he marched the German people through because he said, and you'll never believe it either, and you allowed it to happen under your noses.
My favorite picture is a picture of 2 Israeli fighter jets flying over Auschwitz.
I have it in my office.
I have it framed in my home office.
Yes.
You know, to that point, we've talked about what Israel does, and just as important as what they don't do, they've shown a tremendous amount of restraint. The day that somebody gets up and says, we're going to wipe you off of the face of the planet, when your response can be, we just wiped you off the face of the planet, and yet there's nothing. There is no great retaliation. When the Iranians get close to building a bomb, their center blows up. But if you notice, it's not when everybody's there. It's not when it's surrounded by civilians. They just lose a few years in their march towards trying to come up with the atomic bomb. It seems to me as if the only thing that separates us from a great face-off is time. That we're headed for something that helps no one. This time could be so great. This is time of such plenty. The strides that have been made in medicine, the things that we could do if we work together. Isn't there any way that we pull away from this brinksmanship?
The part of the problem is that the leaders, especially for the Palestinians, really don't want to get to the finish line. Arafat had a deal when President Clinton was president, and everybody it was this close, and then he pulled the plug on it. And it's almost as though they'd rather have the conflict so that they can continue not to have to govern a country. They live large. All the people that are the leaders of either Hamas or PLO, they live like leaders of countries, but they don't really lead. And one of the things that has to happen is the young people, both the Israeli young people and the Palestinian young people, have to also say enough is enough. I'm a big believer in the two-state solution. Now there's talk that that's dead. I don't believe it should be, and I don't believe that it is dead. I think there's kind of a bump in the road right now. But those on the extreme, both sides, have got to, again, move towards the center. One of the worst things, of course, that happened was when Prime Minister Rabin was assassinated, because he was certainly someone who was bringing them towards that final goal. But I think that there still has to be an effort, and it still can happen. I think as the Saudis and the governments of the Emirates start to realize that the threat is not Israel more, and realize that the threat is Iran, that there's going to be more of a chance of a breakthrough, because I don't think the extreme PLO people are going to get the kind of support moving forward that they've historically had if they don't start to move towards a table. Part of the problem, though, is under the current administration, Israel's right is emboldened quite a bit, obviously. But you're right.
You do bring up a point, and that is Saudi Arabia is completely turned around. Jordan has been for some time, obviously, but a lot of these countries are now, they're aligned more with Israel than they are, because of the offset, the horrible possibilities that could come from Iran and what they're doing in that entire region, the way they've kept Lebanon tied up forever.
Hold on, I'm going to respectfully slightly disagree with you. I think the leadership has, because the leadership.
Oh, yeah, without any question. The rank and file on the street is where they always were.
And the rank, in my opinion, when you teach kids from inception, essentially, that we're the devil, it's hard to erase that. But the practicalities of the situation economically, I think the leaders of places like Saudi Arabia and other countries in the Middle East, no question about it.
They know it can't go on. They know it can't go on.
Absolutely, and there's no upside for them to have it continue. But I don't. We have a large
Sharia law has done to Saudi Arabia what they hate Americans every bit. Maybe you get a half a point more for being a Jewish American, but they hate Americans as much as they hate anything on the planet.
And Mark, if you go to Jordan today, which is essentially 70% Palestinian, that's the makeup of the population, 70% Palestinian. They have, I mean, you think of them, they're a friendly country. They're essentially pro-Western. Do you know that they have the highest in all of the Middle East, the highest number of mercy killings, where by that I mean men, fathers who killed their daughters because they perceive, and sometimes have, done something inappropriate sexually. They kill them. I mean, you can read this stuff in the newspapers here, and you say to yourself, how could any country that purports to be progressive have a situation where they, and what happened, the last one that they just reported in the news was the woman comes running out of the home, she's bleeding, she's screaming, help, help. Dad comes and not only completely kills her, stabs her, but sits there on a rock, smoking a cigarette, waiting for the police to come. So he'll get 3 or 4 years. He saved the honor of the family. How do you deal with that? mean, that's not a civilization that we want to be part of. So it's complex. Believe me, it's complex. I know you know that.
David, you mentioned the two-state solution, and you feel that that's still an option. Can you elaborate on what your I guess what you envision as sort of the border of a two-state solution and how that would work, and why you think that's still possible?
I think that there would be Gaza. Part of the West Bank would have to be returned, and the settlers would have to accept that. Jerusalem would be run by Israel, but there would be access, obviously, to holy sites, etc., and there would be constructed if you know the geography, a strip between Gaza and the West Bank that would be Palestinian territory, and I would want the Palestinian side to be demilitarized, but certainly they have security. I've been to the West Bank. I actually went with a delegation of American and Israeli military and politicians, and we went to Ramallah in the West Bank from Jerusalem. Because there were U.S. senators in the group, there were also U.S. marshals with us, and we traveled, and the security forces of the Palestinian PLO we got to a point where it was Israelis guarding us, and then they left, and then it was Palestinians. And I actually went to the headquarters of the PLO in Ramallah. We all had a meeting, and we had a meal together, and that was at a time when it seemed like this was all going to happen, and then it fell apart. So that's how I would envision it. And then,
no, I think that the Jews, Israelis, and it's sort of easy for us to say it from sitting here thousands of miles away, but I think the Israelis, you can't talk about the West Bank as a thing. There are parts of the West Bank that are effectively been annexed by Israel that are right outside of Jerusalem. That's one thing. But these settlements that are in a variety of places, there's a place where theoretically Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob are buried. Small city in the southern part of Israel. And literally, I wish I could exaggerate, there may be 25,000 Arabs, Muslims, and there may be 450 Jews. And the state of Israel has to pay for the policing of that jurisdiction because the Jews need to be safe and they won't leave. And on top of the graves of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, you have a mosque, built a mosque. And you say to the leader of the Jewish community, guys, you can't really think if there's a two-state solution, you're going to be part of Israel, are you? Because the gerrymandering would be beyond anything you can imagine. And they looks at you like you're crazy. Those kind of places are going to have to give up the ship here so that we can get a two-state solution that makes sense and allows the Palestinians to declare victory and go home. We just need to do that. And I could not agree more with David. I think a one-state solution is going to be an undemocratic Jewish state, which is not what, as a Jew, our soul will be ripped out, in my opinion.
I think you're onto something there, because in all negotiations, as both of you as attorneys know, something has to give. And in this case, something tells me it's not going to be the Palestinians. I said that we'd give you a chance, Pat, to talk about Hebrew University. Let's hear it.
And I just want to talk for a minute. You can interrupt me at any point in time. So back in 1918, they had a groundbreaking, but in 1925, more than 20 years before there was a state of Israel, guys like Chaim Weizmann and Albert Einstein and Sigmund Freud recognized that in the prior century, Jews, in this case, got mostly men, because they didn't have too many women as well educated as they should have been, but young men could not be educated in European universities because they were being discriminated against. They were not allowed to do it. So what these these visionaries said to themselves, we have to create a university where Jews, not just Jews, but Jews can go. And we're going to create something that is scientifically, spiritually, you name it, an integral part of a society outside of Europe, because we're not getting a fair shake in Europe, and not just Western Europe, Central Europe, Europe generally. England, none of those places were giving Jews the opportunity for education, higher education. So they started something called Hebrew University of Jerusalem. And it is, I mean, I have to say to you, it is one of the most important institutions in the world. It is essentially a gift, this wonderful jewel that Israel has given to, the Jewish people have given to Israel, and Israel in turn has given it to the world. I'm talking about incredible science, but not just science, religion, philosophy, you name it. That some of the top professors in the world, and these are people you don't just go and attend. These people become your friends. They are people that you communicate with on a regular basis. And the last thing I'll say, and then you can ask me any questions, but the last thing I'll say is the beauty of Hebrew University, unlike universities here where there are a bunch of many times very smart people who are essentially eggheads, and at some of the top universities, the Harvards, the MITs, the Yales, et cetera. Nobody can afford that in Israel. So the very people who are the thinkers have to be the doers as well. And that's the wonderful combination that Hebrew University and other schools, but Hebrew University in particular, does. It takes the thinkers, makes them be doers, and puts them out in the community, and they're hopefully running Israel. One of my all-time great friends is a former president of the Supreme Court of Israel, who history will judge to be a great man, Aaron Barak. I see him whenever he comes here. I see him whenever I go to Israel. And he is these people are wise, and they're smart, book smart, and they're doers. And it's an honor to be part of that family. That's my speech.
And a good one,
Yeah,
and an
Mark,
important one.
here you go, Mark. There's a picture of my brother at the Hebrew University with Eleanor Roosevelt when he was a student there. You know, I know you met him, my brother that was the journalist, but he started out at the Hebrew University and he spoke Hebrew, obviously, and his English was better than mine. He was given the job of touring Eleanor Roosevelt around the campus.
That's a great picture.
Wonderful.
Great.
That's
picture.
wonderful. And with that, we call it a day. The Vegas
Mark,
Legal
thank you so
Magazine
much.
Podcast.
Tyler,
Thank
thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Pat. And David, we're going to have to get together and continue this conversation. It's great to see you. Great to see you.
It's very nice to see you. Thank you both very much. Appreciate
Thank
it.
you.
Bye, Patty.
Sincerely thank both of you, David Chesnoff and Patty Glaser, managing board members of the American Association of Jewish Lawyers and Jurists in Nevada, for joining us today. You can share this podcast on Facebook, tell your friends about it on iTunes, Stitcher, or Vegas Legal Magazine's YouTube station. And if you have a story idea, an axe to grind, you can get a hold of Tyler Morgan, publisher of Vegas Legal Magazine at
702-222-3476.
Thank you for joining.
Smile. Tyler, smile. I want to see you smile.
I'm Mark Fierro.
Thanks, Mark. Thanks, Tyler.
Thank
Bye,
you. Great, really great to see you. It's been way too long.
Thanks, Mark.